Well, it comes as no surprise that if a damaging report, shall we say, comes out about the government and especially its activities, it is of no surprise that the government would choose to try and bury it during a crisis. And of course, we are referring to the Windrush review. For those of you who don't know, the Windrush scandal dates back to, well, a ship that docked called the Windrush, and this was an entire generation of people who had been promised residency, UK citizenship, and for all intents and purposes had it until they've spent their entire lives living here. They've had families, everything, and then all of a sudden, immigration officials just turn up and say, no, we're deporting you back to Jamaica, a country where they never lived, don't even know the language. They knew no one there, but they've had families brought up who again are British citizens, and yet, no, this is a massive scandal, and it should be brought up every opportunity to damage the Tories, because these are people who had lives here and were damaged inaudibly, completely by our government, and others who are threat of facing deportation. It's not fair to them. But yet, the government could step in, the Home Office could step in, now run by Priti Patel. But we all know who Priti Patel is. She's now infamous for pulling up the ladder. And if you don't know what that is basically a term used by second, third generation migrants who don't like new migrants coming in, so they want to stop the flow of migrants. This is referred to pulling up the ladder. And you'll no doubt that this entire thing has been buried under the current T-virus scandal. So this comes from The Independent, and I'll leave it again linked down below if I remember. I never do, but it's easy to find. So, experts and facts really matter. And if the crisis currently gripping the nation has taught us anything, is that the government works better for all of us when politicians listen to facts and reason, even, or perhaps especially, when the facts don't tell a story that the powerful want to hear. But yesterday's damning report of the Windrush Lessons Learned Review, commissioned in the wake of the Windrush scandal, lays bare the reality of a Home Office that's hostile not only to migrants but to anybody who disagrees with it. If we are to avoid another tragedy, this has to change. For decades, governments of all colours have been warned that the political scapegoating and demonising of migrants and minorities, and the use of the ever more hostile legislation to restrict our rights and freedoms, would inevitably lead to tragedy. Communities, academics, journalists, campaigners, and even judges and civil servants have produced reams of evidence, sat on committees, and met with MPs and ministers to beg for even the most basic moments of consideration for their mothers and fathers and friends in communities whose lives have been shattered every time the dispatch box is used to announce a new set of measures designed to punish us for a political gain. Away. In 2014, there has been no shortage on the effort from concerned groups and experts to try and work with the government to do and be better. But our pleas and our offers have inevitably fallen on deaf ears. Home Secretaries and Prime Ministers have come and gone, but in the dark recesses of Whitehall and Tufton Street, the goal has always been the same. If you run the NHS into ruin or fail to build enough houses, you can always blame the migrants for everything. Announce an ever more punitive laws in the hope that a big enough wedge of focus group marginalised voters will hear the dog whistles and join you in your witch hunt. This routine seemed all well too rehearsed by 2012. That, and even in the face of strong opposition from other cabinet ministers and stark warnings of the effects that would have on the long resident Commonwealth nationals, the Cameron and May government felt confident enough in the political calculus to push ahead with draconian laws conscripting landlords, doctors, nurses, and teachers as all-seeing eyes to their hostile government environment. The allegations briefly swirled around a minister being sacked over his position on the now infamous Go Home vans, now sent to neighbourhoods like mine, and Cameron is reported to have stormed out of meetings with the Community Secretary Eric Pickles after a disagreement over the right to rent scheme. As the High Court heard in 2018, the government has ignored evidence that the scheme forces landlords to discriminate against minorities for fear of going to jail or getting fined, and it continues to spend tens of thousands of pounds on legal costs to defend a policy that the court describes as beyond repair. Read any Home Office response to the reports of the independent chief inspector or of the Home Office Select Committee, and you will find that most findings are ignored or dismissed altogether. And note the growing frequency at which government outriders seek to delegitimize the civil service society groups who oppose the Home Office diktat. Imagine a business secretary who refused to talk to businesses, or an education secretary who thought teachers were the enemy. We should be alarmed that the Windrush Review finds at the heart of the Home Office a culture of defensiveness, lack of awareness, and the unwillingness to listen and learn from mistakes, deafening criticism instead of listening and trying to improve over time. And given these findings, it should come as little surprise that in 2017, when stories began to emerge of long resident Britons being detained and deported, denied life-saving treatments, and forced to prove their Britishness, an official government response was that these were isolated incidents rather than the inevitable outcome of political and institutional rot, despite the internal memos confirming that staff were well aware of the serious problem within the Home Office. As of late March 2018, I find myself face to face with ministers who insist that the Home Office policy was not to blame for elderly black Britons being denied cancer care and left to die. In the days after, we were forced to upstage the Commonwealth Summit in London in order to get the government's attention. I left the meeting at number 10 aghast, having been asked by the Prime Minister's staff to issue a supportive statement to help fix the public confidence in the Home Office, after meeting with officials who still believed that death, detention and deportations were fundamentally a PR issue to be swept aside rather than solved politically or with a policy problem to be solved. 2 Home Secretaries later, and little has changed. Most of the victims of the Windrush injustices are still yet to receive compensation for their losses. Many are still chasing paperwork and secure status. And the ministerial insistence on hostility to migrants and critics deepens with Priti Patel, the Home Office Secretary alleged to have forced senior staff to work until they collapse in order to push ahead with the controversial charter flight of deportation to Jamaica, sending men who had lived their whole lives here in a country to a country that they barely know. They can apologise all they like, but ministers know that nothing will change until they listen to the critical voices both outside and inside the Home Office. As odd as it might sound, there are some important parallels between the findings of the Windrush Review and of the pandemic we are currently starting to stare down. It is important to listen to experts, including those who disagree with you. It's important to remember the human beings your decisions affect, and that is as important as it is to be accountable. If the only feedback loop in the system is crisis, then the system needs to be rebuilt. After months of waiting for this report, many will question the government's decision to publish it at a time when the nation is understandably distracted. But the need for root and branch reform of the way the Home Office works, the way it engages with those who disagree, and the way we think about immigration policy and this country will not go away. And whether or not they succeed in burying this damaging report under the current crisis, And building a Home Office that's fit for purpose is not something the government can wash its hands of. And I completely agree. And certainly we are not going to get any form of change to the Home Office under this current government. Johnson and Cummings have made that implicitly clear. And once again, I like to bring up the fact that Brexiteers continuously blamed about unelected officials. Well, I'd like to bring a point of, did you vote for Dominic Cummings? No, you didn't. And yet here he is, a special advisor, with all reports saying that he is clearly dictating policy and reforms into the Home Office, making changes that will affect people's lives, your lives in particular. All of a sudden, they don't seem to care, which, of course, brings back the whole thing of that this whole Brexit nonsense was just a bag of lies. And once again, lies cannot stand. And it will become to no surprise, I highly suspect, that this Windrush scandal will probably happen again. There will be another scandal. It will be called something else. But it will ultimately happen again under this government. And once again, there will be report, there will be compensation, and nothing will change. We have to start thinking on this in this country about radically changing the way we do immigration. The way we currently do it is not working. And remember, most of our immigration to this country is legal immigration. We are very lucky that we have a sea border around us, and as a result, we can control immigration and know who comes into this country better than probably any other country, probably bar Japan. And this whole thing of, oh, we'll bring in this points-based system, the points-based system isn't going to work. It's just going to be ridiculous. And once again, I say to this people every time we bring this up, when we talk about immigration, only about 30% of our immigration was from the EU. The rest came from everywhere else around the world. That ain't going to change. And no doubt the government will try and step that up to try and, well, blame someone else. Because I guarantee you, it won't be too long after Brexit before we start to see MPs and papers try and blame another minority, whether it be a national minority or an ethnic minority in this country, for current blamings, because they can't blame EU migrants anymore. So who are they going to blame next? This is a culture that the government itself, especially the Home Office, has encouraged, and they shouldn't be. And it's absolutely appalling that our government does this and then just washes its hands of it. And once again, the only way we can actually change that is actually to get in a government that actually gives a damn about our people. Because I tell you what, the Tories do not give a damn about the people in this country.